So just take a moment to allow your eyes to close and allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to relax, I don't know whether you'll relax deeper to the sound of my voice or whether it'll be to the spaces between my words. And as you begin to comfortably drift asleep, I'm just going to tell this sleep meditation in the background. And it's a sleep meditation about a woman who is walking through a meadow. And as she walks through this meadow, the sun is beginning to set. And she sits down in the meadow on that grass and watches as that sun sets on the horizon. And while she's watching the sun setting, she picks a dandelion from among the grass, and she gently blows the top of that dandelion. And it seems like hundreds of tiny sparkles spread from that dandelion towards that setting sun as the moonlight begins to fill the meadow. And as that silvery moonlight begins to fill the meadow and the sun sets over the horizon, she watches those sparkles spreading away from the dandelion, spreading off in all directions, slowly floating through the air. And she continues to just watch those sparkles floating away as the grass shimmers and sways in the moonlight, and a blueness begins to set over the meadow. And she feels this sense of regeneration happening to the land as she notices tiny sparkles of light beginning to settle across the grass and throughout this meadow. And as those sparkles settle, she can see the way the trees off in the distance seem to be glowing and pulsating, as if regeneration is happening from the roots up through those trees, up to the leaves. And the whole land around her seems to be beginning to glow under this moonlight, with a subtle purple light, a subtle blue light, pulsing and spreading from within the ground to the tips of the blades of grass, to the tips of each leaf on the trees. And she notices, as she pays close attention, the slight humming sound as the land seems to be pulsing with energy and regenerating. And while she rests there on that meadow, she's curious about the experience that's happening, aware that normally she can sit down in a meadow. The sun sets, the moon rises, but it's generally relatively uneventful. Just an experience that brings a deep sense of peace and calm. And yet here, something about this meadow and this night is different. And as that moon continues to move gently across the sky, she feels this sense of peace, calm and comfort, leading her to lie back on that grass. And as she lies back on that grass, she can feel the blades of grass tickling the back of her neck, tickling by her ears, tickling around her arms, her palms of her hands. She can feel the softness and the gentleness of that grass, and she can notice a certain sensation going with that hum through that grass. And she can notice, as she lies down on that grass, that glowing light spreading out all around her through this meadow, through the distant trees, and beginning to pulse around her. And as the night continues on, so that pulsing increases until that light begins to totally envelop her. And it goes from her looking up towards a sky of darkness and stars to seeing light in every direction. And as that light increases, so she closes her eyes. And as she closes her eyes, she can notice through her eyelids that the light is still increasing and getting brighter and brighter. And that humming seems to be coming from all directions around her. And as that brightness increases, she has this feeling like the brightness is almost like daylight. And then the humming begins to subside. And she can still feel that softness of the grass. And she gently opens her eyes. And as she opens her eyes and gazes up towards the sky, so she notices that everything has become calm and still, that she's experiencing a deep sense of serenity, and that there's an ethereal sense to this world around her, that the sky doesn't quite look like a normal daytime sky, and not enough time has really passed. That it was only a moment ago that night time was setting in. And she looks to the left and looks to the right while lying down still on that grass. And everything has a soft focused glow. Everything seems to be swaying and moving so calmly, so gently. And she has this feeling like there's something different about where she is. It all looks familiar. The meadow looks familiar. The trees are where they should be. But there's a certain soft focus, an ethereal quality to what she can see. And she knows not enough time has passed for it to be a new day yet. And she stands up here and begins to walk through the meadow. She walks down through this meadow. heads down near the trees, all the way down to a river at the bottom of the meadow. And she stands near that river as that water trickles past. She runs her fingers through the water and she can feel the gentle coolness of the water, but notices that as her fingers pass through the water, so light seems to emanate and move around where her fingers are disturbing the water. And an almost twinkling bell sound comes from that water and from the movement. And she splashes some of that water on her face, feels the coolness of that water on her face and on her cheeks, before walking along the edge of this river down towards a stone bridge, crossing that stone bridge, curious about the muted sounds here, the glowing, the ethereal light. She walks over that bridge, following a path, and she continues along this path until she sees some sparkling in the distance, and she starts to head towards that sparkling and notices that its light catching the windows of a glass building. And she arrives at that glass building with just the slightest brick frame around it. And she heads into that glass building where she sees a variety of plants, all glowing in different colours, seemingly emitting coloured light. And hanging on a tree in this glass building, on a very small tree, is a glowing orange fruit. Then she reaches for that orange fruit, picks that orange fruit off the tree, peels that orange fruit, can smell the sweetness of the inside of that fruit, puts her nose near to the fruit before taking some of that fruit and trying it. And as she does, she begins to have this experience of somehow almost becoming a bit like this world. She notices that her hands are starting to glow, her body is starting to glow, that she's starting to emit light like this land. And she heads out of that building. She walks along the side of the building, and off in the distance she sees somebody dressed in purple, and their purple robe is glowing and sparkling, and with every movement seems to twinkle and make the most beautiful sound. She walks to that person, and as she gets closer she notices they're just standing there with their hands together, their eyes closed, pointing their head in the direction of the sky, and they seem to be meditating while standing up. And at first, they don't seem to notice her. And then she gets closer and closer to them. And once she's quite close, almost in reaching distance, she sees them move their head and turn slowly, carefully, and peacefully to face her. And then they open their eyes and they smile. And she feels this deep sense of calmness with them. A sense that they're incredibly friendly and peaceful, and that they are at one with this world. And she asks them where this is, why this world is like this, and explains that she had just closed her eyes to rest for a minute, up on a hill, on a meadow, and that it was night time, and now she's in this light area that's glowing. And they explain that they are the Genie. And they're the Genie in this land, and that there's a connection between the land of the Jinn and the land of humans, and that they were passing through here. And as they were passing through here, she must have drifted into a reverie that allowed her access to the relevant frequencies to see this land. That it rarely happens because most people are so focused on jumping from A to B to C. They don't stop holding a frequency in their mind long enough to really notice that there's a land overlaying another land. That normally people just notice something out the corner of their eye, or that the world just seems a bit brighter than usual for a moment, or that they notice a shape or a slight sensation that normally they don't hold that long enough to allow it to form, for them to perceive what's truly there. And the Genie begins to walk back towards the river and begins to follow that river. And they follow the river down towards a lake. And the woman follows the Genie. And they have a lot of questions that they want to ask. And so they think about the best way to ask those questions. And they ask about how it looked to them like all the nature was being regenerated as they were connecting with this alternate realm. And the Genie says that as they travel around, a large area around them regenerates what it touches. And that it's almost like they travel around in a bubble of their reality, in a bubble of their realm. And that bubble of their realm stretches out from them, and they leave these patches of regeneration as they go. And the genie sits on a stone by that lake, and the woman sits on a stone next to them and continues to ask them questions. And the genie says to focus on the waterfall. And so the woman focuses on the waterfall on the other side of the lake and watches that waterfall as it glows and shines and sparkles while the water slowly descends, as the spray sprays up speckles of light twinkling from the base of that waterfall. And then the woman notices that those speckles of light twinkling up from the base of the waterfall seem to be moving erratically and off in different directions, as if with volition, rather than just splashes of water. And the genie says that they're waterfall fairies, that the energy of the water striking itself in this land triggers these waterfall fairies, and they travel out and they find different creatures, including humans, and they settle down with a creature and they help to guide that creature to wellness. They rest a hand on the shoulder of the creature. They reassure them and they guide them towards positivity, towards the future direction they would like to go. And they do what they can to help those who are perhaps struggling with a direction in life. And that the fairies are known by many names, often depending on the age and what the people think at different ages. Some may think of a fairy as a tooth fairy. Others may think of them almost like a guardian angel. People think of them as different things in different contexts, but their role is to bring something positive to the lives of those they touch. And that they leave the waterfalls looking like sparkling points of light, and they travel across the realms, out of this realm, and almost miraculously seem to appear in the human realm. And this genie explains how these realms are connected, that it's almost like multiple dimensions, and that this realm is just a higher level of dimension, in the same way that if you put your finger onto a piece of paper, then a two-dimensional being would see a solid mark appear in their two dimensions. They would be able to approach it, move around it, but they wouldn't realize that finger was a three-dimensional object, They wouldn't be able to even comprehend up, only left and right, backwards and forwards. They wouldn't be able to comprehend down. And that here what you're seeing and experiencing is a higher dimension, where you're experiencing more than just the dimensions you're used to, and that is what is giving it that strange, ethereal experience, that it's your brain's way of interpreting this higher dimension in a way you can understand. But that fairies and genies and various other mythical creatures travel through the dimensions. They can suddenly seem to appear and suddenly seem to disappear. And that where 2 points are connected to you isn't the same as 2 points here. That these higher dimensions can be almost like a way of travelling quickly between those lower dimensions. And the woman finds this all fascinating. And she asks the genie how you get back from here. Is she still in that meadow? Is she still really lying down on that meadow? And the genie explains that she is exactly where she is, and that anyone in the meadow would see her glowing and walking around just exactly as she is, but they wouldn't see this experience that she's having. But because she is from that realm, they would see her in that realm. But in her current position, she's across both realms. She's in all those dimensions, whereas they are just in this dimension. And she asks how she returns to her dimension. And the genie says it's all a matter of frequency, that all you have to do is close your eyes and focus on being in the right dimension, focusing on what you can see and hear in that dimension, and begin to change those brain frequencies from this dimension to break the connection with here, and that there are a rare few people who learn to be able to control their focus of attention to the point where they can move from one dimension to another, where they can be in both, and to some they'll appear to be glowing, perhaps with a certain colour associated with the frequencies that they're experiencing. And while they're in that state, they're able to communicate with those here in this dimension. while at the same time able to communicate that back to those in the other dimension. And the woman finds this fascinating, but wants to return to her normal dimension. So she rests down on a stone. She begins to focus on the sounds she knows would be in her normal dimension. And as she focuses on those sounds, so she notices the light beginning to fade. The twinkling, the sparkling, and the sounds of the dimensions beginning to fade. And as she opens her eyes and looks around her, she sees that that genie has faded, that she can no longer see the fairies flying from the waterfall, and she can hear the sounds of night time here again. She picks up another dandelion, blows that dandelion, and it spreads out perfectly naturally like normal. She breathes in some of the fresh night air. She then takes a moment to focus on being in the moment again. And as she does, so she begins to notice the twinkling, the sparkling, and then sees that genie again, who tells her that she's on the road to mastering this new skill of being able to traverse the realms, to be able to connect those realms, to travel from one to the other, where she can then explore them both. And that when she comes here, she'll be able to discover what else is here in this realm, in the land of the Jinn. And that with practice, maybe, she can master being able to transfer her whole self from one realm to another and back again. And the woman then finds her way back to her normal realm, back to reality. She notices how dark the night is, long after the sunset. She can see the way the stars are dancing in the sky. And after spending some time in the meadow, some time by the river, and down by the lake, she heads home and sits in a chair for a while, thinking about her experience and what it can teach her about her potential, about higher consciousness, about her ability to be in the moment. And then she heads to bed, settles down in bed, still thinking about how she can develop her abilities and what it could mean for her future. And knowing she'll wake in the morning feeling so refreshed, revitalized, and clear-headed, and looking forward to the day. She peacefully and comfortably drifts and floats, so deeply asleep.